Did you ever think about what's in a name? Sometimes I think we go through our lives and we don't necessarily even pay attention. Somebody is named this and somebody else is named that. Maybe they have the name of thing one and thing two or some such thing. But regardless, sometimes when I look in novels or I read pieces of literature outside of real life, we find that oftentimes an author will insert within the name a meaning or something about that character that they want you to pick up on without being explicit and stating it outright. Sometimes the name will indicate the character was a sly, foxy person or was somebody that struggled. Because the truth is that even as somebody who reads books, oftentimes we don't see the whole picture. And so authors will try to make sure we see everything. In the same way in life, we often go about our lives with little more than a flashlight's worth of light in front of us. We don't have the capacity to turn on a light and see the whole room. Oftentimes, I think that when we look at what is going to happen, we only have the gift maybe of just a little insight. Perhaps it's a candle worth, or maybe even a really intense LED flashlight's worth. But if you hold a candle or a flashlight in a very, very, very dark room, you still don't see very much. So the author, I think, is attempting through a name to give us that candle or that flashlight. When it came to this week's Parsha, we had an insight. There was, of course, the infamous name change of Jacob going and his name changing to Israel. Israel, of course, often means we associate with struggle. Nahum Sarna, on the other hand, points out that it could in fact be related to Yashar, straight, in that maybe it was that Jacob straightened himself out after confronting God. And it got me thinking, what and whom did Jacob really confront? And was it enough to straighten himself out? Let's not forget what was going on. Jacob and Esau had done all sorts of things together. Jacob had tricked his brother not once, but twice. He was coming back into the land. Jacob had acquired all of this wealth. He was very anxious and concerned, so concerned, in fact, that the Bible uses the word fear not once but twice to let us know the mindset that Jacob was in before he went to that fateful encounter and somehow got straightened out. Who did he confront? The commentators are at a mystery. The Hebrew Bible implies it could have been a man. The commentators in some cases say angel, in some cases say God, in some cases they're playing with the fact that, again, here we have yet another insight into the name, that Jacob was wrestling at the river of Jabbok, an alliteration, implying that he wasn't wrestling at a specific river, but he was wrestling with himself. And while he was at that river, he kicked up so much dust, he had so much internal stuff going on that it camouflaged one part of himself and maybe revealed yet another part of himself. The question is, again, who was he confronting? Maimonides went so far as to wonder about who was Jacob confronting and said he wasn't confronting any one person. He had a dream that caused him to have self-revelatory moments, and that is when he was able to finally see what he had done and accept who he was to become. Not long after all of this transpires, of Jacob having either a deep encounter with himself, an encounter with God, an encounter with angel, does he come out and we learn the Hebrew Bible describes him as somebody who has everything. And he is not described as Jacob, he is described as Israel. Israel who has everything. And the commentators there imply, what is that everything? He already went in beforehand with all of this wealth. He went in beforehand with the wives and the children, and he already had things set up for him. So what is exactly did he go in and come out of as whole? The implication, according to the rabbis in the Talmud, was he came out whole with a sense of God. Israel, Yeshar, straight up, and El, he came out straight because he was empowered and had a deep faith with God. Instead of having fear, like he had at the very beginning of the story of what would transpire, because he could only imagine, and most of us do, we imagine the worst case scenario of what's going to happen next. He instead had a sense of faith. He understood and accepted perhaps the little flashlight or candle of insight, just a smidgen ahead of what he was going to look at and see, was in fact enough. That he didn't in fact need anything beyond that. We see after this incident that Jacob really in many regards takes a back seat. His children step up. There's more interaction of what's going on with them. We see that there's the incident with Dinah, and eventually Joseph goes down into Egypt. But Jacob, maybe he is whole. Maybe he's walking upright with God. Maybe he's simply come to a sense of acceptance and found peace. I think that's what the Bible was implying by giving him perhaps the name Yeshar, in that he was upright and he was able to no longer feel the need to engage in trickery, no longer feel that fear and wanting to hide himself in dust, but rather to be who he was and accepted that everybody else would find him as enough. May we all have that excitement to be able to stand up for who we are, as we are, and know that we too, like Jacob, can become enough when we become straight, upright, have a little bit of faith as we act out him becoming Israel. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will.